Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Kavanaugh. I'm the Director of Solution Engineering at Tableau for the teams that are focused on healthcare and life sciences. If you're on this call, odds are that you're part of our data fam and are with us on the mission to help our respective organizations see, understand, and act on data. That last element, acting on data, is really what we're here to talk about today. We're so pleased to be joined by Cleartelligence, one of Tableau's top partners. Today, we'll hear from Katy Sandlin, Principal Consultant, and Matt Fogelgren, CRO at Cleartelligence. They're going to talk with us today about different ways that we can embed analytical assets directly in the flow of an end user's work to help organizations make better decisions with data. Matt and Katy, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to hand things over to you to tell us more about your perspective on embedded analytics.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. My name is, again, Matt Fogelgren. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Cleartelligence. And just a couple of slides on who we are to give you a background on why we are actually presenting and where our experience comes into play before we get into the real exciting content, which Katy will share with you. Cleartelligence is a Tableau partner. We are a data and analytics consulting firm. We've been around for well over 10 years. We have completed 500 projects across various industries. And our real secret sauce is the people that work for our firm are practitioners. They come from both technical as well as business backgrounds. So they've lived in your shoes, they've worked at customers before they joined us, and now they share that experience across many different clients in multiple different industries. So we're really excited to partner with Tableau to present our viewpoint, our point of view on embedding analytics specifically to health and life sciences organizations. And Katy is one of our functional experts as a principal consultant at leading some of these really innovative solutions and projects for helping our clients become successful. And just a few points of where we bring value to our clients. And really, if you think about the hundreds of clients we've helped already in this journey, we do a number of different things, such as cloud data architecture, moving data from sources to new modern architectures. And really the end goal is, how do you drive business value for your organization? And more importantly, how do you bring best practices, modern architecture to drive value for answering questions and moving your organizations forward? And one of the key areas is, how do you embed some of that into the current workflow to make it more simplistic for your users, your customers, your partners to consume information at point and thought within another system potentially to impact how they actually make decisions and move on to do their job much more effectively. So with no further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Katy to have her go into more specifics of the content and why we believe we can help you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt and Andrew. And so like they said, lovely to meet everyone. My name is Katy Sandlin. I'm a principal consultant with Cleartelligence. I do a lot of work in the health and life sciences space and also in the manufacturing space. And I'm also heavily involved in a lot of our application development projects, which is where we feature a lot of the embedded analytics that we're going to talk about today. So that's a little bit of my background. And before we jump into the actual use cases that we're going to talk about today, I wanted to just take a quick second to ground everybody on what we mean by embedded analytics. I assume a range of people listening into this webinar might have used it or just be initially interested. So before we really get too far, just wanted to take a minute and explain what we mean by embedded analytics. So I grabbed this quote from Gartner. I thought it was a really good primer, basic but salient. So the idea is just embedded analytics is a digital workplace capability where data analysis occurs within a user's natural workflow without the need to toggle to another application. Simple as that, sort of as Matt and Andrew alluded to, it's data analysis where you need it at the point of information gathering and action. And so embedding Tableau content allows you to add the power of Tableau's interactive visualizations to your existing applications, both internally for your own employees or externally for your customers. And we are gonna talk about some of the pros and cons of each, some of the technology considerations and requirements gathering situations for both of those options, and a few of our own use cases that cross sort of both spectrums of that. And pulled from Tableau's site, some of the common use cases of embedding are putting Tableau dashboards as component in line of business or vertical applications. That's where Cleartelligence often employs our embedded analytics suites, and where I've been involved in quite a number of projects over the recent years. Other options include embedding those into internal knowledge bases and CRM systems. Obviously, with Salesforce, that's an obvious one with Tableau, and there's even the Lightning connector to make that even easier, but it's not limited to just Salesforce. There are ways to do that within other systems. For some of the more public-facing content, you can use this to add interactive visualizations to blog posts for public content, just to increase visibility and data sharing in those capacities. And then embedding them within custom mobile applications, which is another place that Cleartelligence has done a lot of work recently, is with custom mobile apps and how we can utilize analytics in that space. So just a quick primer for everybody. And then before we jump into the use cases, I wanted to cover one other topic, which is this idea of what is decision intelligence and how is it related to embedded analytics, especially for health and life sciences. So the idea of, or this term of decision intelligence was sort of first popularized in American computer scientist Lorian Pratt's 2019 book, Link, which you'll see here. There's more information in a linked article by Forbes that talks about this, but that was one of the first places that it sort of started popping up in I think it was 2018. Somewhere around that time, Google also started to hire a chief decision officer. These topics started to percolate. And this all sort of began originally as the idea of integrating theory from social science and decision theory and managerial science into data science, with the goal of helping people make informed and efficient decisions. That was kind of the original intent, was very theory heavy, but these days where you're likely hearing the phrase decision intelligence, if you are, is around the incorporation of machine learning and artificial intelligence into decision-making workflows, especially with the emergence of ChatGPT and other generative models and things like Einstein from Tableau, all of those different components. And what I wanted to highlight here in particular is that, health and life science industries tackle high stakes, fast-paced situations in the field, which really highlights the impact of having the right data in the right place at the right time and taking some of the grunt work out of getting to those intelligent decisions. And so embedded analytics really can be a conduit for enabling this concept of decision intelligence across your organization. Okay. So, with no further ado from that, I'm going to jump into some of the use cases that Cleartelligence has encountered around embedded analytics in the healthcare and life sciences industry. So this first use case was a pharmaceutical portal that was built for sales reps directly in the field. So the use case was, this was a large US subsidiary of an international pharmaceutical company. And the problem that they were facing basically is that their field sales reps of the drugs that they were selling had no visibility into real-time clinical data needed for some of these sales conversations with providers, and also information about sort of the providers' prescription ratios and things like that. And so the solution was that Cleartelligence developed a web application portal wrapper to facilitate a one-stop shop where these sales reps could have access to key internal applications like SharePoint and other documentation and links that they needed for these conversations, directly alongside visual metrics-based reporting. And so you'll see two quick little sort of screenshots on the right. This is an anonymized version of our portal and of the type of reports that's provided. So this was not the actual solution delivered to the customer, but it was basically along these concepts. So you'll see in the top screenshot here, these are essentially icons that took the user to different sections of the portal. So they work just like links. You click on one, it's going to take you somewhere. So some of these took the end users to documentation links, to other internal linked applications for them. And then some of them took them directly into the reporting that we see here. Some key considerations for this use case: it needed to leverage a centralized SAML-based SSO login system. It needed to be used live in the sales conversations with the providers, like I mentioned. It needed to involve row-level security because it was limited to an individual sales rep's accounts or regions, which is a common use case, especially when there's region-based distribution of sort of sales in that capacity. And a big one here is that it needed to be optimized for use on an iPad screen size. So these were, again, field reps out having actual live conversations with providers. So they didn't have a big laptop with them, they had an iPad. So we needed to optimize both the design of the Tableau components for the iPad and also the performance and flow of the portal that we put around it. And then a big one, the thing that ended up taking a lot of our time in this project in terms of optimization, was they really had a requirement and expectation here of instantaneous performance congruent with a web application for the embedded dashboards to provide a seamless experience. And so for anyone who has, tried to work with Tableau dashboards with large data sets alongside web applications, they really have different sort of initial loading expectations and things like that. So what we did to deal with this situation is we actually leveraged browser-based caching, so that essentially when the sales rep logged in initially in the application, the minute they started that login process, no matter where they were going within the application, we were grabbing the cached data, grabbing and caching in the browser, essentially within the app, the data for the app, for the dashboard, so that when they clicked on, by the time they clicked on the dashboard, it had already loaded behind the scenes. We optimized obviously the load itself, and it felt as if it was instantaneous, basically congruent with the other components of the application. And so this was really powerful for them, and it was a really exciting use case. It sort of crossed the boundary of an internal versus external use case. Obviously, it was being used by their internal employees, but it was being used in conversations with essentially providers who sort of represent customers in that situation. And it was made in a way that there were parts of it that they could see themselves, local for their conversations, and parts of it that they could sort of turn around and, potentially show the providers if that was relevant to them. And so I have one more screen here, which is just a zoomed in version of one of the other, again, anonymized sort of our versions of the accelerator screens for this use case, but just so you can kind of get an idea of the types of dashboard elements that were involved here. And so this specifically is sort of showing the total prescription volume versus new prescription volume for individual providers. You could limit by the region or the state or the city. So you can imagine sort of the individual sales rep kind of looking at this before they're having the conversation, and then perhaps during the conversation, clicking on an individual provider that they were speaking to and showing them just some of their information, talking about the market share and facilitating different conversations in that capacity. So this was a really exciting project for us, and we do still have kind of the version of the portal that we developed there. We have optimized and used in a couple other places. So that was a great opportunity. So that was kind of the first big use case. The next use case here, actually same company, but a completely different project group and a completely different use case. This was completely internal. It was for internal financial forecasting. The project management group, in this case, they needed a way to track forecasting and accruals across varied types of projects. In this case, rather than go with sort of the very lightweight portal application, and just a side note on that portal, it was built in Angular with a backend in Java. It was entirely file-based, so there's no database required for the actual portal itself, super lightweight. In this case, we developed an actual custom web application for this initial solution, featuring embedded Tableau reporting, and all of this as a collective unit was replacing a legacy Microsoft Access-based solution. So again, the screenshot on the right is an anonymized sort of accelerator version that we have, but of the same type of data that was included in this case. Some interesting things about this use case that I think are relevant to people who are looking into getting into embedded analytics, especially for their internal teams, is that this data had never really been available for visualized reporting in any prior iterations of the tool, right? It was in Access. It was not in really a heavily normalized format that could be easily transformed into analytical layers. And so one of the big things here is actually our initial Tableau reports that we embedded within this application were very cross-tab heavy to start. I really wanted to highlight with this use case that you don't need to have these, beautiful end state dashboards ready to go to see any use and power out of embedded analytics. There's a bunch of reporting and requirement gathering going on now to get some visualization for the data that we've enabled them to capture with this tool. But there was a lot of value that they were able to receive just by embedding initial sort of cross-tab type data in a new combined format that hadn't been available to them before. And a lot of what they were using those cross-tabs for was audit functionality. So things that they might have needed to kick out and store for themselves to make sure they were in compliance with various components. So I think it was a useful thing to highlight that you don't have to have these, huge, gorgeous visual reports to get use out of using Tableau to embed. In this case, it also saved the customer time and money from us, because if we had built all of the reports that we've started to create here in the application, even though they were kind of cross-tab heavy, built them as from a web development perspective, it probably would have taken us double or triple the time that it took to just connect up the Tableau to some analytical views that we built live off of the normalized backend model for the web application and just embed them. So we were able to sort of get that up and running in front of the customer faster and easier than it would have been to just build it as part of the web application. And the other positive, of course, is that now these also live outside of the application. So there may be people who, in this case, are performing the data input here who would be in the application every day, but there could be some executives or other people who may want to see just these cross-tab based reports, just the end state output, even if it's not visual yet. And so doing this via Tableau allowed us to have that external as well if they wanted to share it. So that was exciting. The other component of this was we really, with both solutions, but this one in particular, we were really hoping to create a foundation for this team for some future use of machine learning and advanced analytics, especially around the idea of forecast accuracy, right? This was a system to help track forecasting and accruals. They'd never been able to store the data in this format before. And so as they go, this will be a future state, but as they start to accumulate data, in this context, they will be able to hopefully use it to train models to look at sort of their future state forecasting and also just do some descriptive analytics on how accurate their prior state forecasts have been. So more to come with this use case, but it was an exciting implementation for that team to get it up off the ground and replace sort of a legacy system and see benefit right away, even before the sort of more robust executive suite of visualized reports off of this content were available. So that was our second use case. And then pivoting completely, the third use case that I wanted to talk about here was actually a public health dashboard that I actually helped develop in the early days of the COVID pandemic. So during the emerging months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Johns Hopkins case data was initially not easily visualized or optimally formatted. They were just trying to get information out as quickly as possible. There was a lot of gaps within the data for states or counties or areas that weren't reporting. And so Cleartelligence essentially developed an Alteryx plus Tableau public COVID-19 dashboard. You can see kind of on the right here, tracking total cases, deaths, and mortality rates. We embedded this dashboard on the homepage of our website for expanded visibility and ease of access. A lot of us, I know at least myself, shared this with like family members and people who are just looking for information. You can tell by the shape of the curve on the right there how early days this was. It's before places like the New York Times and other different outlets had kind of created their own versions of visualization tools that were sort of more mature and would be used throughout the rest of the pandemic. And so like I have here under the key considerations in this use case, speed to market was a huge component here, which is relevant across the health and life science industry in general, not just for obviously emerging health crises, but things change in the blink of a moment, especially with point of care implementations and some of those different field components. And so it was exciting to see how quickly it was sort of under 48 hours turnaround on ingesting this data and getting something up and then embedding it within our website and then using that for distribution across a bunch of channels. For people who had already had access to this, who might not be as familiar with Tableau Public and understand what they were looking at if they accessed it directly from the link versus our existing website. In this case, that we sort of needed to aggregate a whole bunch of different granularities of the public health data and like I said, handle gaps in the reporting availability, which is, I know, often if you're dealing with public health data, which a lot of organizations in this industry vertical have to, that's something that you have to deal with across the board. So in our case, we use a combination of Alteryx and sort of some tooltips and display elements here to indicate where something was either suppressed or filled in. But that was a thing to think about when you're utilizing public health data, is just how you're going to deal with gaps, how you're going to communicate those gaps, and Tableau's tooltips and a lot of the things you can do with the embedded Tableau reports make that really easy instead of trying to hard code something into a website that might change 5 minutes later when the new data comes out and now there's not gaps or now there's different gaps. So that was a really useful thing for us as well. And this was another one that we heavily optimized for mobile usage, both just for access and for easy distribution. Obviously, in the early days of the pandemic, people were, trying to get information whenever and wherever they could. They were checking these things whenever they were out. I know a lot of people obviously were trying to stay at home, but checking things before trying to go to grocery stores and things like that. So we optimized, obviously our website was already optimized for mobile, which was another nice thing here. So we built a mobile version of the Tableau dashboard. We specifically designed it so that when a user was accessing our website, it would flip to the mobile version and the Tableau would follow. And so that's a model we've used at a lot of places. I've used that exact optimization path, and it makes it so easy, again in this case, because the web application wrapper handles a lot of the sizing, and then Tableau already has wonderful mobile optimized features, and so you can just leverage those. Basically, we kind of reorganized this into a more columnar format. You sometimes flipped the axes of charts that didn't make sense on a smaller screen. But this was just another exciting example of how we were able to use embedded analytics quickly to provide emerging access of information to both our existing clients and customers who are looking at our site, and also to our own personal family members across the board. So those are our use cases in this case. And then before we get into any kind of questions or back and forth about all of this, I wanted to spend some time on technical and security considerations. And then after this, I wanted to spend some time on requirements gathering and business optimization. So in terms of technical and security considerations, I think people looking at some of those use cases or with use cases of their own might be initially overwhelmed if they've never done this, or especially if they don't have a lot of history of like web development background. What API or embed method, should they select, and are there any that are better or worse specifically for the HLS industry? And so I've listed out here several of the main ways of connecting. Obviously, to start, the copy and paste of the embed code that's directly available from any Tableau website, where you can essentially, or any Tableau published visualization, where you can essentially go, there's a little section in the top bar essentially that generates embed code. It's going to spit you out a little HTML JavaScript sort of little snippet of code. You copy it, you plug it in, and it will just work out of the box. And I'm pretty sure that our first embed of the COVID-19 dashboard just used the copy and paste embed. I don't even think it was a public dashboard. It didn't need row level security or any of that, right? It was all publicly available health information. I'm pretty sure as part of that, build this and get it out quick, we leveraged that, and then I believe upgraded it a little bit later to use some of the embed components. But that is a great starter for anything like the blog content, anywhere where you don't have to worry about authentication of your users or passing parameters from any kind of web wrapper in, where it's really purely informational. And you just want to quickly share a visualization that's available elsewhere. I've even seen some internal applications where it wasn't relevant to even pass that information through, right? And so even with, I think, our first version of one of the embeds on the financial reporting system, we're just going to dump in the copy and paste embed, because everyone who has access to the tool has access to everything else that's in the dashboard. And so again, it allows them to just have quick instant access, and then we can filter it down and update it from there. So it's also a nice way to just get optimization of sizing and anything that like your web development team might need to look at, or your Tableau designers to look at. It's a nice starting place if you just want to see how it's going to look. So there's honestly, as simple as it is, a lot of great functionality that you can get out of just the straight copy and paste embed, even if you don't have the technical know-how or a team behind you to do some of the more programmatic embedding. And then the next two here are kind of two of the same concept, but so there's sort of the new embedding API version 3, which is really the current recommended way to do embedding, and then the JavaScript API, which is version 2. So the embed API is basically a newer version of the JavaScript API. Its main difference is that, if you're familiar with sort of web development concepts here, its main difference is that it creates for you a component that can just be placed within the HTML or sort of the view section of your dashboard. You don't have to build that yourself. So if you're familiar with HTML or the way sort of any of the tagging languages work, essentially you can just create a component that says Tableau-Viz with a whole bunch of parameters and plug that sort of snippet into where you need it to go in your front-end code and apply classes and customization and all different types of things to it. So that's the real power of the embed API over the JavaScript API. But the JavaScript API is in use on a lot of legacy stuff as well. I believe the initial portal use case that we had leveraged the JavaScript API. That was kind of before the embed API's time from a few years ago. But pretty much everything I've done myself in terms of any of the embedded application components of Tableau dashboards has been using the embed API recently, and it's fantastic. It's fast. It's been much easier to deal with for the SSO, as we're going to talk about in a second here, integrations and all of that. So those are kind of two of the same, where it's the more programmatic version, with the embed API being the latest and greatest, really optimized for the model view controller libraries, things like React and Angular, really easy to use. And then the last thing here is the Tableau-Viz Lightning web component, which is really for Salesforce. So this is a quick access method where within Salesforce, if you want to just enable Tableau visualizations, it's kind of the Salesforce equivalent of the copy paste embed code. And essentially you just take the URL. It's even easier, really. You take the URL of the Tableau dashboard that you're looking to embed, you plug it in the right place within the Salesforce suite, and then you have a whole bunch of customization options and ways that you can interact with everything around you. So these are all hyperlinks. There's tons of great documentation on Salesforce and Tableau's websites around all of this, but that's just sort of a few quick highlights about sort of which to choose. And I think especially for the health and life sciences industries, right, there's a lot of security concerns around, like we have here, sort of the HIPAA and the PII data, personal information data. So unless it's something that's truly public data, more often than not, it's likely you're going to want something as robust as the embed API to be able to more effectively do things like row level security, make sure you're truly passing, single sign-on or other sort of Active Directory level permissions for internal or external, depending on how that's all sort of networked together with your customer base. And so, like I have here, right in this next section, thinking about internal versus external. There's a lot of different things to think about here. If it's an application that's completely behind your own company's firewall, it's never going to be accessed externally. You can do a lot of stuff quickly that you don't have to worry about with other external implementations. But we have a lot of clients as well who, even if they're developing an embedded analytics use case for their own internal customers, they want it to be something that's accessible to those employees outside of their VPN network sometimes, or they're going to be doing some kind of cloud hosting thing that's going to be generally accessible within a browser, and they want to be able to access in that case. And that's where you really get into sort of the power of some of the API components there in passing, secret key-based authentication or other different methods there to ensure that only the right people are getting through, that you're not going to have any breaches, that you're going to be compliant with any standards that you need to be compliant with. And same thing for the enablement of row-level security. And so this at the very bottom here around SSO and sort of the Kerberos stuff, for environments that already use one of these systems, they can just be instantly leveraged to achieve single sign-on or to leverage database security. And we've really found that combinations of sort of Tableau user groups on your Tableau server with existing other Active Directory groups, when they're synced together, and some database level RS can be really powerful, especially if you push some of the RLS into the database. That can also help with some of your Tableau side performance, depending on, if you're in one of the cloud optimized solutions where you can sort of scale your compute up and down as needed. But yes, a personal just anecdote on this front as well. In an application that I was trying to do some embedding with much older language, we ran into an issue where the embedded Tableau was trying to loop with the single sign-on. So essentially it wasn't detecting the web application single sign-on. It was trying to ask the end users to sign on again within the embed. And then when they did that, it was, storing multiple sessions within their browser and making everything very angry. And actually it turned out in that case, It was an issue with the implementation of the web application code and not the way that it was set up with Tableau. It had to do with how seamlessly the application was handling its single sign-on sessioning. So that's also just kind of a word of caution, right? Don't always assume it's the Tableau method if you're starting to see something weird with the SSO or with RLS. In that case, the Tableau API piece was actually completely fine, and it was the web applications implementation and hookup to its SSO component that needed to be updated. So yeah, lesson learned on that. But I will say that since using the embed API, it's been easy and pretty seamless with just about any project we've worked on it with. And then one of the last sort of technical considerations that I wanted to talk about here before we jump into the requirements conversation is that, especially in health and life sciences, you're dealing a lot with extreme data sizes of clinical data or health information, which can present challenges to embedded dashboards. Certainly, we saw that with the dashboards that we were embedding in the Pharma portal that we built. And so, right off the bat, that was several years ago. That backend was for the Tableau components was more of an Oracle implementation. These days, leveraging some key scaling features of the modern cloud databases can really help a lot here. Obviously, you have to be careful that you don't blow out the cost on the compute, but things like Snowflake, where you can specifically give more power to certain warehouses, certain reports based on your need, can help a lot with that. If in some cases there's just no way to get around the fact that you need a lot of data and you need it at scale and you need it in that particular location. But the other ways we've gotten around this challenge are, again, the caching that we talked about earlier with that same implementation, where we started to kick off processes to cache the data the minute the user got anywhere near using our dashboards, but also separating out the data sources into meaningful, smaller chunks. And I feel like this is another place where the power of embedded analytics can really do a lot for you. So in a traditional Tableau dashboard, you can lay out the dashboard, you can have tabs within the dashboard, but it's all kind of right there. Whereas when you're embedding, you can have a section of a website where you embed just a single piece, a single dashboard or view, and then down the page or on a different page, you can have a different component that's fit for purpose to that section. And so we've done that a lot, and actually doing that again in a current implementation where essentially we have a large data set that we want to optimize, and we're breaking it apart into a whole bunch of different chunks and actually putting 5 different embeds on a single page. So pointing to different places with different data sources. So again, they can start to load right off the bat. They can load from different essentially analytical model views of the same component. But because of the way the embed API can throw parameters between the different sections, you can still get the type of click functionality and the type of drill down functionality that you might expect out of a traditional Tableau dashboard. So chunking in that way has been a big help for us. And so, yeah, so those are some of the sort of tech and security things to think through. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about before we jumped into questions and anything else anyone might want to talk about on this spectrum was requirements gathering best practices, right? Because I think a lot of people don't think about the fact that this is different when you have a mixed use model. And so I really try to tell our clients these days, right, you need to tailor your requirements gathering to embedded analytics. You need to consider website specific workflows and external data elements in the requirements conversations to avoid a disjointed data story, right? If you make the data flow within the embedded analytics component, but there's different data or different just sort of click actions or things on the page that don't make sense and that don't work within an optimal sort of user experience flow, you're not going to get the same level of decision intelligence of user experience that you would if you took that whole picture into account when you're doing the requirements gathering to begin with. A big piece of this also is sort of understanding the information seeking behaviors of your users, especially across health life science platform types, right? You have things like point of care, which might have sporadic internet access, extreme mobile use and all of that. I feel like in particular in the health and life science industries, there's a lot of usage in the field, right? What people might call in the field. People are not necessarily always sitting at a desk where they have access to a computer and they can view this in an optimized way in that fashion. A lot of this really is about providing the right information at the right time on the right portals so that they can access it. So understanding those information seeking behaviors can help you both design the data, but also understand things that, like, if internet access is going to drop and reconnect 3 times in a provider walking across a huge building, or someone in a location where they just don't have good internet access, and you want to provide health information in developing countries, different things like that, you can design the dashboards and design the caching and design the website to account for that, and to snapshot and to process in different methods. So that's a big one. Another piece of this is just also to think about sort of ADA compliance. A lot of times people will optimize their Tableau dashboard for some of that, optimize their website for some of that. And if they're not done in the same way, that can also be confusing for users. So things like, are you using hover text in one versus, specific info type callouts in another? Just making sure that the way in which you are providing that type of supplemental information to the users is consistent, or as consistent as it can be throughout the website and embedded access components. Another big piece here is to really define your embedded reporting SLAs and align them with the surrounding environment. So this goes back to that same caching example, but it became a huge sticking point on that engagement where, they really just expected and required the Tableau dashboard to perform at a certain level that they were expecting of the other web-based content. And we just had to figure out how to make that work. So a lot of times, this can be not avoided, but it's good conversations to have up front rather than, down the road when, expectations might be one way and you're developing and not taking that into account. It might lead to you doing things like caching or breaking apart your data source or any of that. So that's a big piece that I always say to people going down this route, is just make sure the users understand what's possible with Tableau, what's possible in the browser, and how you can marry those up for the best experience. And then the last component here that I wanted to sort of touch on was really, I found it useful to lean heavy on and leverage and reference web development design principles for these mixed environments. A lot of Tableau developers obviously reference sort of visual design best practices. There's a ton of Tableau specific content, but there's such a long-standing industry of user experience and design principles in the web world, and a lot of them can be really useful in this context. So whenever I'm doing any of these projects with embedded analytics, I usually go down the full route of building out full scale sort of user experience personas. The example sort of that you see over on the right there, where you're actually really going through and documenting out all of this information about who's going to be using your tool. Some people do this for Tableau specific implementations as well, but I think the robust nature of like actual full scale personas is more often I've found used in the web space, and I think in these combo contexts can be so helpful. But just, understanding all the use cases. And in particular, I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that the health and life sciences use cases, similar to the information seeking behaviors, often are going to feature a wider than usual spread of sort of technological literacy and comfort, especially if it's something that's external facing, right? So if this is something where you're providing access to health information, potentially to a public facing audience, there's a huge barrier for entry there. It's extremely important, especially in that case, to make sure that people are understanding the data, that the data is accurate, that they can access it at the places and the types of technology that are comfortable to them, browser compatibility, things like that you might not think about as much with just pure Tableau implementations. And so I've found that the persona and use case, a lot of times we'll develop like pretty complicated workflow diagrams as well to understand exactly sort of the click patterns from the site into the dashboards, making sure that all of the parameters are covered, right? All of the styling and sort of just behaviors are covered that the end users would expect, because I think when you have these mixed use cases, it's even easier than just with a regular website to confuse people. And it's even more difficult for your IT teams to triage if people don't understand how to even report to you what the problems are, if they're seeing behavior that they wouldn't expect from an embedded component versus the full website. So these are some of the big requirements, gathering best practices that we've gone down with this to be really successful And the nice thing is as well that a lot of those personas and the use cases and the descriptions that we write up there end up translating really well into documentation, training guides, and things that you can hand out for the user, or even hover text and sort of explanatory text for people in these environments. So a lot of times the effort spent up front on some of that project management methodology components and the persona and development can be reclaimed later in the project as documentation for users and for IT and other support who have to maintain it. So yes, so that was all of the main content. And then I think we're going to open the floor up to questions. And I don't know if I can see the chat, so Andrew, you might have to facilitate this.
Not a problem. So first off, thank you, Katie. Great material. Matt or Katie, I don't know who wants to take this, but how would we engage with Cleartelligence on embedded, and how should people reach out to get engaged?
Yeah, I'll let Matt take that. Oh, I think you're muted, Matt.
Sorry about that. I guess I need to take care of the technology here. Andrew, great question. Thank you. As I indicated earlier, and as Katie walked through, we've got a plethora of experience with helping companies in this journey. So I would say the first thing is, if you're embarking in a strategy to do any type of scaled analytics and you're looking for assistance to help you, especially around embedded, certainly you can reach out, Cleartelligence, rightthebottom.com, and there's a lot of good resources there. But we would be glad to have a conversation just to talk about what your challenges are, what you're thinking of a strategy. You may be at the beginning, you may be in the middle, you may be somewhere on that journey. You might need a little bit of help, you might need a lot of help. So we will engage at various different levels. And the main goal is to help you with our experience, with our people, to ensure your project's successful so that you have really a robust solution that you can build upon long term. So certainly you can reach out through just our website. We've got a contact us form through LinkedIn as well. Certainly that's the best way. And then we'll have a conversation and chat with you about what your needs are and how we can help you.
Great, thank you, Matt. And then Katie, you did a really good job showcasing the upfront requirement gathering and how to best manage that. What does the second half look like after you were in production? Is there ongoing maintenance and support available, or do you do a transfer of ownership and training to a dev team to help maintain the solution?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it really depends on the client, and we do sort of all manner of that across the scale, right? So we have some clients where they are pretty small, lean operation. They don't have their own development team, right? They're engaging with us to build a solution and then sort of step out. But a lot of times in those cases, we will set up sort of a support contract, help with anything that they need, or we will train a couple select individuals. But pretty much across the board, whether we are going to help maintain this or we're going to hand this off to an internal team, we're going to develop pretty robust technical documentation. Like I said, a lot of that upfront stuff then turns into descriptions of workflows, and it can help inform the support model for all of that. Usually there is maintenance across the board. If data sources change, especially with website stuff, if any of the authentication methods change, companies change their methods, right? Say somebody was using a specific cloud platform, and so they were using Active Directory with Microsoft, and then they decided to switch to a different provider, right? You're going to need to update some of the ways that authentication is provided. So those are examples of some things we've done. Also, anytime you have embedded analytics off of databases or with data sources, you may find there's new data coming in, or new data coming in breaks existing visualizations or does something to an existing visualization that you might not expect. Especially in live data connections or with some of these big data use cases at scale, right? There might be something where when we first start, it's nice and performant and everything's great, but it's a live type connection, and as the usage grows, the system grows, it needs to be adapted to either use caching or extracts or anything like that. So those are some of the common things to look out for. But like I said, so we can either sort of support ourselves with documentation no matter what, or oftentimes several of the clients that I work with have pretty robust internal teams. who are, sometimes this is in their area of expertise initially, but sometimes they're just busy with other things, right? But are able to support after the fact. So we'll come in and do the implementation and then do a whole bunch of training, both for the end users, of course, that are doing it, but also for the IT support systems, code reviews, reviews of the Tableau documentation, and perform handoffs in that capacity.
Makes sense. Thank you. You touched on one thing that brings up another question. So you touch on, future state, data changes, et cetera. What are your thoughts on, say, Einstein or other emerging AI models that we see coming out right now? Seems like there's a new one every day, but how do you think those could be incorporated inside of embedded analytic implementations? And are there any concerns or risks to the approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, you mentioned Einstein, like that's an obvious, easy option out the gate, in terms of just plugging that into your existing Tableau reports if you want to put in sort of some predictive ML capabilities. But I think it's important to note that with easy comes risk, right? So when you have sort of the level of accessibility that you get with Einstein, depending on what level of user is implementing it, if it's a Tableau developer versus a data scientist, and Einstein comes with a lot of different levels that you can engage, where you can sort of just ask it, your highest level discovery questions, and it's going to generate an answer for you, or you can actually start to refine the models and the types of results that you get from people who might be, more power users in that space. But the risk with some of those higher level components is if you enable this on a data set that isn't robust enough from a training set, or that has implicit bias, or any of the other components, obviously you run the risk of getting the opposite of decision intelligence out of that case, basically. So it's a super powerful tool. And I would say with mature data sets, or in situations where people have data scientists on hand who can really understand the implications of the models that are being applied, it's great. And you don't have to do a lot of the old development that you would have to do with testing and training and setting up the types of models that would be available there. As far as the generative stuff, there's already a ton, in the ChatGPT world, there's already a ton going on with that. I would say a word of caution in that space, everyone is saying this, but I think it's especially relevant to the health and life science community, right? These are public, most of those are public models. If you're trying to upload data into those public generative models to get information out, there's a lot of risk of, putting sensitive data into a non-proprietary location. So I think there's a lot of hope that the future of some of these generative models will be implementations that can be installed behind firewalls, so that companies can have sort of their own versions of them and not have to risk some of that, wide-scale proprietary, but a lot of that's sort of still to be determined. And then I think, of course, with the generative models, obviously you have to sort of add the caveat of, the risk of misinformation, and just weighing, especially again with these sensitive health and life science topics, is the risk of misinformation as these models develop, worth the outcome that you might get from it. But I think in terms of just some general predictive, the Einstein and some of the other components, even just writing stuff up in, a Python script and integrating that within the flow that generates the data that goes into your Tableau model, can be really powerful. I know Alteryx also has quite a robust ML and AI component kit. And so, you can do it at the point of visualization, which is what Einstein is great at, but you can also still, of course, do it in the prep for the visualization, and then specifically provide the outputs either as the same visualization or different tabs, wherever it makes sense.
Great. No, I think you're spot on. Like, there's a fair amount of good detail there. One, in the caution of using some of the predictive elements and making sure you're not introducing bias. And so, having the experts around is definitely a good call out to assist and really model that out. But then also, yes, on the generative side, there's a lot of confidence behind those models when they give their answers. So certainly worthy of testing. So thank you for the detail there.
Yep.
I think that takes us through all the questions that we have today. So Matt or Katie, do you have any closing remarks before we close out?
No, just thank you so much on my end, and I'll leave it to you, Matt, to close us out. But thank you so much, and definitely, like Matt said, feel free to reach out to us directly, both about potential engagement stuff, but also just if there's questions about the stuff that's in here, and some of our public Tableau accelerators that we have on your guys' website as well are very relevant to a lot of these embedded use cases. So thanks so much for having us, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us participate here. We're excited to help customers in their journey and just be another set of resources to ensure your success. So thank you for listening, and we appreciate the opportunity.